Hey guys, Tyler at RC Madness. Got a different kind of video for you today. So we have that brushed Rustler 4x4. So I'm going to be showing you today how to convert it to the brushless Spec. There's quite a few parts that are different, not just the motor and speed control. But of course, if you want to just put the motor and speed control in, you could. But we were going to do a full Spec. So the brushless one comes with the adjustable tie rods instead of the plastic solid links, so we're going to throw those on. The drive shaft setup in the brushless one is the aluminum shaft and the metal spline end instead of being a solid plastic one with a plastic spline. And then while we're in there, the clutch on the brush one is a smaller clutch. The brushless one uses the bigger clutch with the aluminum shoes, like the Revos and Emax's size clutch. And then it actually uses the Revo differentials too, so they're a bit stronger. So we're going to throw those in there while we're at it. I'm going to stop in between and show you guys some key things, and then we'll show you the completed product at the end. Alright, so we're going to start with the rear end of the truck here. Pull out the 2 screws on the top. And there is 2 on the bottom. The ones on the bottom are a little bit longer, so take note of that. And then the whole back end slides out. And I'm going to pull the clutch out too. And these are a little stuck in there sometimes, wiggling around. I'm going to set the front end over here because we're going to work on the back end for a little while. We'll do the clutch first. So this one has the smaller clutch on it, so we're going to have to tear this apart. I'm going to pop the spline off, just 2mm set screw. Then we got the nut here, 8mm nut. Just hold the gear and turn it a little tight. Nut, spring comes off. Bearing will probably come off with that plastic piece. Slide the gear off. There's the old plates. I'm going to pop the gear off of here. These are 2.5mm screws. Push this out the back side. Tight, sometimes you have to pry it off here. Flat head underneath it. Leave the bearing in there. So this is where the new clutch plates are coming in. Little size there, so much bigger discs. The kit comes with another screws and nuts and a couple cone washers, but you don't need those for this car. We're just going to use the original springs and nut. Alright, so we got the shaft. Slide the new plate on. Like that. We got to bolt this guy to our gear. They are directional. I don't know, these are indented for the cap head screws, so this goes on the opposite side of that. Put those screws back in. Like that. And this plate goes on here. There's 4 little grooves. It sits in, kind of locks in. A little tricky, this piece here, until we tighten down the spring. Make sure that pin's all the way in. And these shoes go in little grooves. These things like to fall off, so if you got a little super glue or Loctite It's not bad to put on there. Makes it a little easier to put back on. You gotta kind of hold it upside down like this. Slide it through. And just give it a quick check and make sure all those shoes are still on their pins, because if they're not, it'll fall off when you're running it and basically be rebuilding it again. So we gotta keep pressure on all that. We're gonna slide our nut on with the bearing, spring, and the nut. Make sure you keep pressure on these plates so we don't lose the shoe. It's an 8mm nut. I like to just crank it pretty much all the way down, very tight, and then I back it off about 1/4 to 1/2 turn. We're gonna have to adjust that later on. Then we slide our spline back on and tighten that back up. And that is the upgraded clutch setup for the brushless one with the aluminum shoes and the bigger plates, so you can handle that 3-cell. Well, now we're going to move on to the next bit. Bumper off. Screw in here. Got 2 screws up here by the tower. Slide this housing off. We have to disconnect the drive shafts. There's a 1.5 screw in there. You can pull it out and disconnect them if you want, but I'm just doing it while it's in. Side clutch. Alright, so we got the rear diff out. So the brushed one uses the Slash and Stampede 4x4 ring and pinion. I'll pull the pinion out too. I should just push it out. There you go. It just sits in there. So the brushless one uses a little bit bigger, heavier duty from the Revo ring and pinion, and the pinion gear is actually bigger, so you should get a little more speed out of it. So we're just going to pull this gear off here. I'll open these up first. Wouldn't hurt to have a paper towel or something handy here. Pull these off. Open up the diff. It's going to be packed with grease, so keep an eye on that. This should just slide out, just like that. There's an O-ring on it, so take note. Stuck with the gear on this one, but just make sure you keep an eye on that. And then just slide this back in, like so. Put this cover back on. Kind of locks in place there. Let me put the line it up with the holes, put the 4 screws back in. Ring gear there, pretty easy. You can see the teeth are a little bit bigger on these. I don't know if you guys can see that, but if you're doing it at home, you'll be able to see the teeth are bigger on this one. Handle a little more power. And then you got the pinion gear, has physically more teeth on it and bigger. So Get a little more speed out of it there. Slide the bearings back on. And there's your diff. That's the rear diff, changing the ring gear. So I'm just going to go ahead and throw this back together. When you do put it back together, you don't want to put some fresh grease around the ring and pinion gear. Alright, so we're going to throw the rear diff back in. I got some grease here. Actually, I'll throw the pinion in first here. That just slides and sits in the bearing. I'm going to throw a little grease around this ring gear. Throw that back in. Okay. Reconnect the drive shafts. These are keyed, so you can only go on one direction. You just got to spin them around until they line up. Usually do this with the diff out. It's a little easier to line it up when the diff is free. Set screws back in. Snug those up. Don't have to go crazy tightening those down. Lined up. Set screw. Bearings should just sit in there nicely. Rolling free, make sure nothing binds up. Kind of hard to put it together. Backwards tracks it's a pretty good job modeling these. We'll throw the housing back on. 2 screws in the top. We got the hinge pin brace. And this cover. The long screw in the middle. We got 2 countersunk underneath. Throw the bumper back on. And the one thing I don't have in this video that the brushless one has would be the wheelie bar that goes on here, but it's just the 2 screws on the bumper here. If you have one of those. That's it. So we got our rear end back together, ready to go. Now I'm going to set this aside. We're just going to set the clutch aside too, because we have to wait till we put the aluminum drive shaft in. We have to take the front end apart to change out that plastic drive shaft. It's attached to the front end still. So we're going to go ahead and pull the front end apart now. Front end's a little harder than the back because it's got all the steering components, but we still got 2 screws on the top. They're all on the top on the front. Tucked in by the battery tray here. Short ones go towards the back. Front should come off, but the steering should be still attached, so you gotta keep an eye on that, which it is. So I'm gonna undo the screw going into the, we call it a drag link, instead of disconnecting the horn, because then we'd have to recenter the servo. Don't disconnect at the horn, unless you're changing the servo, and that would be an opportune time to change that if you want something different or better. They think they got Traxxas as their Metal Gear servo, but we'll leave that like that. So straight chassis stripped down. So really 5 screws, you can rip this truck into 3 pieces. All right, so there's our drive shaft. So it's connected here. That's where we're going to put that metal spline on. Right here. We got to do the front diff in this one as well, because that is different as well. That uses the Revo Spec differential parts. The front end, pretty similar to the back. Switch to my 2mm. Pull these 2 screws out the top. Pull the bumper off. Should be a couple of, the bumper has 3 big ones on the bottom here. Back to 2.5. Those are all the same size. Now the bumper should come off, so we didn't miss anything. It slides out, a little wiggle. That screw. I'm going to switch back to the 2, pull off the hinge pin brace, set that aside, and then this one has the 2 up here as well. Usually just pull them out with the front end here. Same kind of housing, front and rear there, not too much different. Disconnect the drive shafts. It's 1.5 pin. These are threaded. Same as the back. Pull those out. Slide out, slide them off, and we have the front diff out. And we got the front's a little different than the rear. The pinion won't just fall out. You got to disconnect this plastic shaft, which is all one piece, instead of using a spline like we're going to replace it with. So that's just got a regular screw like the drive shafts, 1.5 pin. Slide that off. So we're changing that out. We don't need that anymore. And then you should be able to just push this pinion out like so, and there it is. There's the old parts. We're going to replace with the new ones. This is going to be the spline, so we'll change that out in a minute. We're going to change the gears here. Those open to the 5379X. Instructions in there too. Doesn't hurt to have your manual here with the exploded views too. Again, we have the different size here, so I don't know if you can see that. Much bigger pinion on this one, just like the rear. So if you are going to do this upgrade, you can't just do one, you have to do the front and the rear, or you'll have 2 different ratios, and it's not going to be good on your drivetrain. So we're going to put that over there. Change out the ring gear for the bigger one. Pull the bearings off. Pretty much the same as the rear end. Let's take these out. 2mm cap heads. Slippery, a little greasy. That out, just pop out. Careful of any oil or grease. And also Also this O-ring, the last one the O-ring stayed on the diff, this one's staying in the ring gear, so make sure you get that black O-ring out, that's got to stay. So mine stayed in, it stayed in on the rear, so it may stay in on the front one for you too. Just got to throw that back in, it lines up with the screw holes. A little sticky. Fight with that a little bit, it's all greased up. Put that on there. We got the out drive. Make sure the O-ring stays on the little blue one. Stayed in this one, so we're good. Slide that back in. And we gotta line up the 4 holes here, 4 holes there. Make sure that gasket stays in place. Like so.
Push it back in.
Didn't go too much torque on those, so just into plastic. Just put our bearings back on this. 2 different sizes, so take note of that. It only fits in one way, so not too much problem. Let's get this off here. We're gonna go ahead and change out the pinion gear, and we gotta put the spline on that one. It's the 6888X. They do give you a set screw. They put a little Loctite on this one, so I'm gonna use this instead of the old one that comes with the plastic shaft. Because it is metal on metal, so the Loctite will help. Just slide this back in, just like that. Lost the DRIVESHAFT. Worry about that after. Okay, we're gonna throw the pinion on. Only goes one way. It's only threaded in one hole, so make sure you line it up with the right one. We'll try threading it in the hole that's not threaded. Lined up. Should go in nice and easy. Gonna feel some resistance because it's got a Loctite on it, which is fine. And just give it a nice snug, and that's it. Pinion on there, so that's gonna allow us to run the aluminum drive shaft, which I'll slide in when we put the front end back on.
Throw the diff back in. Put the grease on afterward. Screw shafts back on. Sometimes. Oh, rotate it around until I slide in. This one slid out the spine here, so I'm just going to slide back on. Just use it back. Flat spots again. Just going to do. Spots always lined up here.
Again, that's in place. I'm gonna go throw some grease on this now. Spin the wheels. Alright, I get grease on that. Now we can put this back together. Housing. Diff brace. And this one doesn't have a plastic cover, so you just put the screw right in. Screw. And then our bumper. we go. So that's the front diff and pinion gear, and we put the new metal spline on it. So now we can go ahead and put the front and rear end back on with the metal drive shaft. Put this guy in with it. It's a 6765. So we gotta get this together here. So getting the front end on is the hardest part, so I usually save the drive shaft for when we're putting the back on. So we're gonna have to reline up this steering component. Just get them both upside down. You get this lined up through here. That screw ready. Be kind of hard to see, but the screw goes through the steering piece and then into the plastic. So you gotta kind of get your tool in here. Be kind of hard to see, I know. Line it up with the steering crank. And so this is a lot easier than centering the horn on these. The LCG chassis makes it a little tricky, but it's a trade-off for the handling. That lines up there. There's a little tab here that has to tuck into the chassis. Make sure that gets tucked in. It should more or less kind of fall where it wants to, like that. You can kind of feel it click into place and you'll know it's right. Let me flip it over. All the screws for this one come in from the top. Get the screws here. The shorter ones go towards the front here. Towards the back, actually. Slide our drive shaft in. Should hit that spline, make sure it gets on that. That'll take you a couple tries to line that up. There you go, see now we're on it. Keep that kind of tilted so it doesn't slide out. We gotta put our new updated clutch on. Slides in, the bearing does sit in a groove in there, so you might have to wiggle it a little bit. Ours fell right in, so now we got our drive shaft, make sure everything's spinning good, nothing binding up, and then we can put the rear end on. So you hold the rear end like this. So this is keyed, so you got to make sure this and this kind of click into each other. Usually got to get it just sitting on the shaft, and then I kind of spin the wheels, and you kind of saw it drop in place there. We'll throw the two on the bottom. Which are the longer ones. And there you go. Two there, two on the bottom. Alright, so that's how you do the center drive shaft and the ring and pinion on the front and rear differentials. Next we're going to do all the tie rod ends, which you could have done them at the same time, but I decided to do a separate segment about it. So we're going to go ahead and do those next. Alright guys, so the next step we're going to replace the tie rods. The brush one just comes with the solid plastic ones. We're going to put the adjustable ones on. So I'm going to show you guys how to do. We're just going to do one of the rear ones because they're all pretty much the same. Just two screws, one on each end for all of them. So once you figure out one, they're pretty much all the same. Didn't mention in the beginning, you are going to need some 3x15 screws because the stock plastic ones use these shoulder screws instead of the pivot ball. So that's a 2579 Traxxas number. There's a couple of these half screws in them, so you just need the one bag of screws. We're going to go ahead and do one of the rear ones first, which is 3644, the shorter ones. So the back ones you can actually just leave the tires right on it. It's just a 2.5 to get it off. These are the shoulder screws, so I don't know if you can see that. So we're gonna get rid of these, but you can hang on to those because they might come in handy. Then we gotta get this screw out. A little bit of an angle with the bumper, but easy enough. You don't have to take the bumper back off. So there's our stock rod and screws, which are leaving off. And those are our washers. I said these are 3644. I'll just do the other ones too. The front ones are the 3643 and the steering ones are 5539. So I'm just going to go ahead and put those on. Get the back one here. They all work the same. One screw on each end. This one, these rear ones came with a screw. We might as well use those. Put the pivot out here. Actually, just really kind of hard to see for me. We put them back in the same holes so we don't have to adjust too much. Put it this way. So I'm gonna use the bigger screw on the outside. I guess it don't really matter. These do have two different ball on them. I put the I guess the longer ball on the outside. Those down, don't go crazy. And then we gotta get our regular screw. Those. And of course these are 2mm. And just put these ones back in the same hole. Just like that. That's it. We just put our adjustable one on there. Now I'm going to go ahead and put the rest of them on, and then we'll move on to the next step. Alright, so I went through and finished putting on the adjustable tie rods. Pretty straightforward. There's nothing really I have to highlight. I mean, just 2 screws on each tie rod. Can't really put them in backwards. A lot of the pivot balls only fit in one direction. It's pretty easy. Just make sure you don't over tighten anything. But yeah, now we're going to move on to basically the reason for the video. We're going to put the brushless setup in. Now I believe Traxxas does the power up, so if you have the brushless setup and you want to exchange it in, I believe it's $125 for the brushless combo if you turn in your old electronics. Don't matter the condition, or you can keep them. I'm not sure their full value on this thing is like $160 for this if you just buy it straight up. But let's go ahead and open that up, put that in. Open it up first so you guys can see the Millennium setup here. A little unboxing here and give you some tools and screws. Not sure whether we'll need those or not right now. We got the speed control. It's pre-wired, ready to go. If you're putting this in a Traxxas product, you shouldn't need any tape or any soldering or anything like that. It's just going to bolt back into the original holes. Wiring is self-explanatory. You can't plug this in backwards, so just make sure you plug it in the same way you take the old one out. Pre-wired with the ID plug. And they give you the plate. This is for the 2-wheel drive models. We're not going to need that today. And then, of course, the motor. So get all this opened up. Then we're going to go ahead and take the old electronics out and put the new in. So first off, I'm going to open the receiver box so I can undo the wiring for the speed control. We have to take off the little one on top because we're going to have to feed the wires into the box. So those are two 2mm Allen heads. Set that aside. And I switch to the 2.5 for the box. This cover should come off. Might be stuck a little. It's got the little silicone on it that you just put from the factory. Okay, and we're looking for the speed control wire, so you're just gonna have to fish that around, make sure you unplug the right one. Should be channel 2 anyway. Channel 2. We'll feed that back through. And that's the speed control. Channel 1 is a servo, so if you end up unplugging them, just plug it back into channel 1. There's 2 channel 1s, so take note of that. We'll talk a little more about that when I'm plugging the new one back in. You can leave that one, just leave that open like that. And we're gonna have to pull the speed controller out. So on here, there's a little, I don't know what you call it, wire holder that we gotta pop out first. So that holds the wires down. Hang on to that because we can use that again. These you just gotta pull apart. Sometimes they're a little tough. So that's motor and speed control is separate. Then there's 2 screws that hold speed control in. Hang on to those screws. We're going to use them again. And our speed control is free. We got our speed control out. Throw that aside. And we're going to go ahead and take the motor out. The motor, we're going to take off this cover here, screw on the top, pop this cover off, and then you gotta take out this silver screw here. That's a 2.5. This is the motor adjustment screw, but we have to take it all the way out to get the motor out. It's a little easier if you take that cover off, you can see a little better. It's only 1 screw. Silver screw for the motor. There's a nut in there, so at this point if you flip the car upside down, just take note that there is a nut in there. This just kind of slides to the side, comes straight out. There's a little groove here that sits on this screw in here, which you don't have to take that screw out. It just slides on it. Alright, so now we get the motor out. We gotta take the pinion off and the screws that hold it on. Put this to the side. Take the pinion off first. It's the 1.5. Be careful taking these off. Sometimes they put a good amount of Loctite on it. Don't strip out the set screw. Set that aside. Same with these screws. Use the hand driver for these because sometimes they're a little tight. Not too bad on this one. Take note of the orientation of this plate too. I want to put the brushless motor back in the same direction. So that's those 2. This plate will come off. And we got the old motor. Now we're going to grab the new motor. Have the wires pointing up in the plate like this. They're going to be perfectly straight up and down, but we just don't want them pressed against the chassis. So we're going to line those screws up with the motor screws. Get those started. Be careful starting these because they're going right into the motor. You don't want to strip them out. It's just aluminum. And then just don't tighten that first one because we want the plate to slide around a little until we get the second one started. So let's line up the hole. We'll go ahead and tighten this one down. Tighten that one down, snug them up good. And slide the pinion on. Don't over tighten the pinion at this point because we have to realign it with the spur gear. That's why I pulled that cover off. So you just kind of snug it up so it doesn't slide around, but not to go crazy. So now we got the motor bolted to the new plate. I'm going to go ahead and put it back in. And it lines up on that groove on that screw on the bottom. Just kind of slide into place, just like so. And we can put our new screw in. The mesh doesn't matter at this point, we're just getting it all snugged up so I can realign that pinion. Don't want to tighten this yet, just want it so the motor's not flopping around, sitting straight. Just Just leave it loose so we can still move it like that. And now we have to realign that pinion with the spur gear. I don't know if you guys can see this, but I'll try to do it so you can see it. But we got that set screw right there. Make sure that set screw is on the flat spot of the shaft too. Can't really do this. There we go. I'll line it up and then see if I can get you guys a close up. I don't know if you guys can see that, but I just basically just make sure the spur gear and pinion gear are getting full engagement on the teeth. It just keeps it from getting stripped out. If you're only using half the gear, then it's going to strip out easier. So now we're going to set the mesh. There's a lot of different ways people use this. Probably the most common way to set the mesh is with the piece of paper. I've been doing it a little while, so I just kind of know where it needs to be. Basically, I just hold the pinion gear and just kind of wiggle the spur gear. You just want a little bit of play. If it's too tight, it's going to make a lot of noise and build heat. If it's too loose, you're just going to strip it right out. So I just kind of move this till you get a nice, just enough wiggle. And I kind of test it in a few spots, because most of these gears are a little out of round, not perfect. But that's pretty good. We can wiggle this a little bit and kind of hear it. I don't know if the camera will pick it up or not, but once you're satisfied with that, go ahead, tighten down that screw. It should roll pretty easy. If it's not rolling easy, mesh is too tight, and a little bit of noise is okay. It's just the magnets in the motor. So that's the motor in. We can go ahead and throw this cover back on. Maybe. There she goes. And that was the little short screw that goes in that one. Don't need to go crazy tightening this one down either. It just holds the cover on. Just going plastic. Okay, so we got the motor in. Now we do the speed control. Unwind the wire here. And then this red plug here is this is for your accessories. So most of the people use it to get the clip-on fan for the speed control, but it does have this little slot here. You can keep it in if you want. The fan is good. If you're going to be running 3-cell, I'd recommend getting the fan. Alright, so when we put it in the chassis, should line right up with 2 holes in the chassis here. Use those stock screws. Screw it back in. Use the longer screws. Use the longer screws, my bad. Gotta use the longer supplied screws in here. The speed control is actually a little thicker, has a thicker ear on it than the stock one. They're 2.5 screws. Snug it up. Make sure you don't pinch any wires in there. Alright, so the speed control's bolted in. We gotta run our wire through the top of the case and into the receiver. It's going to be in channel 2. Like I said, there was 2 channel 1s in there, so if your servo's plugged into the first one, you have to skip a slot and then it's channel 2. I see a lot of guys both plug them into channel 1 and it won't do anything. It'll just sit there and flash. So make sure you get it in channel 2. Can't mess up the orientation because it has a little tab on it. And then we just have to get all these wires shoved back in here. This on this side. However you guys want to rewire it. Make sure you don't pinch any wires in the case. That's the tricky part. Should kind of pop back in place like that. We get screws. You don't need to over tighten those either, just sitting on that O-ring makes it waterproof. A little extra silicone grease on that if you're really going to be in the water. And then these wires sit in these little grooves here, these little teeth. Make sure you don't pinch one in the teeth. And the little cap goes on. And then we get the little screws. Let's use the driver, get it started. And that's that, she's wired in there. I'm gonna hook up the motor. They're all color coded for you. Yellow, white, blue. Can't mess those up. And then we still have that little wire holder. Bring them down. Just tuck them down in there like so. And then the wire holder bolts back in the same hole. Dropped it here. The screw fell in the chassis. Hold on a second. That.
The simplest thing.
I'm going to bolt down the wire holder, get the screw out of the chassis. Just thread that in. Like that. So we should look something like that when we're all done. Brushless motor, brushless speed control, bolted in. Good to go. Now I'm gonna, while I got it here, I might as well show you guys what you gotta do next. If you're running the stock Traxxas radio equipment, I can show you. Still got the nickel metal battery. You can still run the nickel battery with the brushless. Just throw that in. Get in. So you have to recalibrate the speed control so you get full speed out of it. So make sure your radio is on. I'll try to flip this around so you can see the lights a little better. Basically, when you turn it on, you gotta hold the button down until it flashes red once, then let go. It'll flash red once, you gotta pull full throttle. Twice is full brake. Then it flashes green and it should stay steady. And we're good to go. Now it's flashing red because the brushless system comes out of the box ready for LiPo. So it thinks we have a dead battery in here. If you're running nickel metals, you want a solid red. Running LiPos, you want a solid green. So if you're running LiPos, you should be set out of the box. You don't have to switch the mode. I would recommend switching to probably a 2 or 3 cell LiPo to get the full potential out of the system. But that's it, guys. That's the full brushless spec. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.